Hi, Govanid. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and this is part 2 of details that Peter Jackson got right in The Return of the King, which will end this part of the series, and that leaves only the remaining section on subtle changes that he made, which I'll be covering soon. So, this will cover disc 2 of the extended edition of the movie, and we've got actually some surprising entries in this one, so it's kind of interesting. And the first one is, in fact, one of the surprising ones, sort of. It's kind of in the category of how could he not do this, but it's also kind of in the category of that actually is mildly surprising. It's not that surprising because he does throw in a lot of Elvish in the movie, but he tends to do it in ways that have nothing to do with the book. And so it's actually kind of surprising in this context. It's where Frodo pulls out the Phial of Galadriel and he yells, Aya Erendil Elenion an Kalima, which of course is Hail Erendil, brightest of stars. And this is a moment which doesn't have to happen. And so the fact that he actually uses an Elvish phrase which is out of the book, which isn't really necessary, is kind of nice, actually, given the other mess that he gets into in this movie. So, again, it's kind of one of those where you could say, did he really deserve credit for putting something that's just literally straight out of the book? But considering that he doesn't do that a whole lot in this movie, and that he also, when he does any kind of Elvish in the movie, it tends to be something that's actually not from the book anyway, it actually is worth noting, at least. Another one that's kind of surprising, and it's more surprising, if anything, because of the, let's say, the culture of the time when these movies were made. The fact that Denethor refers to being burned to death as a practice of the heathen kings of old, that actually is pretty much straight out of the book. And it's interesting because you would think that in any kind of a Hollywood production, it would be a little tricky getting away with something quite like that. I mean, it wasn't quite so bad back in the early thousands. You could still get away with more things than you probably can nowadays. But even so, when even hearing it in theaters at the time, I was kind of surprised that that line made it into the movie, because it's an odd thing to say, for one thing, because we're in a setting which is not an explicitly Christian one, so to say that anybody is heathen comes across a little anachronistic in some ways, which of course is not the way that Tolkien meant it in this context. But also, it's such a derogatory term for people who just don't share your religion that it's kind of surprising that somebody didn't say, "Hey, we can't put that in the movie." So, the fact that it ended up in the movie is a actual mild surprise to me. Next is possibly my favorite scene in the entire movie, which is the arrival and the charge of the Rohirrim. It comes at the right moment. It's done very well. It's actually got Theoden riding out ahead of everybody else like he's supposed to in the book. And cinematically, it's done so well with the swelling music and everything else. There are some minor things you can nitpick with it, such as the fact that, really they didn't arrive exactly the way they should have, and it should be a little bit more of a surprise. But it's not, a complete surprise, because there are, the horns that get blown in both the book and the movie, so nobody is caught completely by surprise by this. But it's just done so well, and most of it, other than Theoden's speech, which is actually words, some of his words are taken from other parts of the Battle of the Pelennor Fields from other characters. There are minor quibbles you could have with it, but overall the experience is so good that I think it was worth putting here, because even though it is one that is kind of, how could he not do this? There's enough of the details that are right, and enough of the actual experience of it matches kind of the experience I get when reading the book that, I'll give it to him. Here's another one that you could argue, he doesn't really deserve credit for because it's straight out of the book and such an obvious thing to do. But this is one, again, where I think, given the amount of stuff they cut for time, it actually kind of makes sense to give him a little credit for it. And that is Aragorn acting as healer. Now, he doesn't go into as much of that in the movie as, of course, Tolkien does in the book, because it really mainly shows him dealing with Éowyn. And in that sense, it's, one that I almost would be tempted to leave out, because it's not so much even showing Aragorn as healer as it is Aragorn as caring for Éowyn. But you do get that look from Gandalf kind of in the middle of it, where he's, well, not in the middle, but it's kind of more at the beginning, where he's seeing all this devastation and whatnot, and you get this smile from Gandalf as if he's thinking, okay, it's time, Aragorn, let's do it. And of course, then Aragorn starts doing his work. And, it is actually kind of nice to get this scene where we see Aragorn doing this, because it is a really key component of who he is in the book. And it would have been really easy to skip, because they do skip over a lot of the other details that make his intervention so important. The black breath element and all this other stuff. The injuries and whatnot that he treats in the movie are mostly not really life-threatening. It's actually kind of odd, because Éowyn is not breathing, and then when Aragorn comes along, she actually starts breathing again, and it's not clear why in the movie that is. It doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense without the added context that we get in the book, but that's what makes it something that would have been easy to skip. None of these people that he's tending to have really serious problems that couldn't be tended by somebody else with healing knowledge. So it is nice that they took the time to put that in there, despite the fact that they took out the context. All right, here's one where Peter Jackson falls short of even the Rankin Bass film, which actually happens a few times. I just haven't been mentioning them all. But the Watchers at the Tower of Cirith Ungol, I always like this part of the Rankin Bass films, and the Rankin Bass film actually gets it pretty much exactly right. And this is one of those where, again, you can tell they're probably kind of cutting it for time, and because arguably it would be a little odd in a movie like this. It would kind of stand out as kind of strange, but they at least do, when Sam is entering the tower, show the Watchers and kind of linger in that shot on them, so that you can kind of get an idea of, the people who read the book, they know what that's a reference to, and so they can get that element. And so it's kind of nice that he at least put a visual reminder of, hey, yeah, I know these things are here, even though I'm not doing that part of the story. Later on, when Frodo and Sam are trekking across Mordor, we do get a scene, which is out of the book, where they have to dump a lot of stuff. And the key point here that I want to focus on is not so much that they're leaving stuff behind, but it's the fact that what we see from a shot from way down below, they're throwing a bunch of stuff into a chasm. What we see is mostly Sam's cooking gear. And the reason I highlight this in particular is because in the book, this is a huge deal to Sam. It really upsets him, because that is such a key part of who he is. He's been the cook for the whole company, even, for more or less since the start. And him throwing that away was really emotionally difficult for him. And the fact that we get the scene from this perspective of, way down at the bottom of a chasm, and he's throwing it over and never going to find that again. And, the way it's shot really kind of conveys that finality and that, disappointment a little bit, even though we don't get him, saying anything about it. It's done in such a way that you still get the book, feeling out of it. So I thought that was a really well done shot and deserved a mention. Another one that could have easily been skipped for time, but which also is kind of, if he skipped this, he needs to be jailed for crimes against Tolkien, is the moment where Sam talks about the star. It says that there is light and beauty above that the shadow cannot touch. And of course, in the book, he doesn't actually say all of those lines. It's actually more of the thoughts in his head that are recorded in the book. But of course, you can't really do that so easily in this movie. It's not done in, the film is not shot in a way that we get people's internal monologues. So he kind of has to be done in the style of a dialogue. And as a result, we do get basically the exact words of the book just actually spoken out loud. But again, it is one of those things that could have been easily skipped. And it is important to, I think, the theme of the story as a whole. And so it is good that Peter Jackson did not cut this part just for time, which could have been an easy decision in some contexts. So I'm glad this scene made it into the final cut. As they get closer to Mount Doom, we see a scene where Frodo is walking ahead of Sam and he starts kind of batting the air in front of his face and whatnot. And this seems a little odd, but this actually is straight out of the book, and it's recorded from Sam's point of view, saying something to the effect that it looks like he's warding off a blow or something like that. And so we actually do get that in the movie as well, where Frodo is clearly having something like a hallucination, and it's not really clear either in the book or the movie, because we're never told from Frodo's perspective what he's seeing or experiencing. So we are left wondering what exactly is going on, but that's, kind of the idea. It's the whole idea that it's from Sam's perspective, and he's just seeing this, wondering what is going on and feeling pity for his master. And, it was kind of surprising that they actually put that in there, because it is a kind of a strange thing to see from Sam's perspective, because we don't know what's going on, and in the movie we still don't know what's going on. So it's one of those things where it's left to the imagination of the reader exactly what Frodo is having going on in his head. Next, we get one that is not exactly correct, but is, correct enough, and that is at Aragorn's coronation, because when he starts singing, he is actually singing lines which are actually straight out of the book, although in the book he doesn't sing them, which is kind of a weird thing. In Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies, unlike his Hobbit movies, where he actually does a lot of the songs and does them as songs, in the Lord of the Rings movies, he does not do a lot of the poetry and songs, and he certainly doesn't do them as songs very often, with one or two exceptions. Pippin's song in front of Denethor is actually one example of that, although he does it, it's kind of a hodgepodge of two different songs, if I remember right, and it's definitely not sung in the way that it was clearly intended, because it was in a radically different context, walking in the Shire. But in this particular instance, he's turning, a speech by Aragorn, which is actually quoting words that Elendil spoke when he came to Middle-earth, and he turns it into a song, Et Earelo Indorina Utulian, and then there's a lot more to it than that, but he is singing this song at his coronation, and it's basically Elendil saying that he has come out of the sea to Middle-earth and he will stay here and make his home. So that's kind of a big deal, because Elendil's history and the loss of Numenor was a crushing emotional blow to him. And so saying that he would make his home in Middle-earth was kind of like his acceptance of his fate. And here in this context, Aragorn is in the book not really talking about that kind of sad finality so much. He's kind of more talking about a renewal aspect of it. And in the movie, we don't know, if you don't know what it says in the book, you don't have a clue what it's talking about. But again, for those who are watching that have read the books and know their stuff, it's a nice nod to that moment. Next, we get the scene that everybody loves, for the most part, and that is where Aragorn comes up to the four hobbits and they bow to him, and then he says, "My friends, you bow to no one." This moment does not exactly happen in the book, and it, nothing like it happens in Minas Tirith, but it does harken back, and so I include this because it's a parallel that kind of works. It harkens to the scene at the Field of Cormallen in the book, where Frodo and Sam, when they are finally both awake, are presented to Aragorn, who takes them and bows to them, and then everybody else bows to them, and Aragorn basically heaps praise on him, and everybody is, shouting their praises for who knows how long. So it's not all four hobbits. It's not in Minas Tirith. There's no, the line is not from the book. The whole line of, you bow to no one. The details are all wrong, but the Field of Cormallen is honestly one of those easy leave out for time purposes decisions. And so I understand leaving that out, but then having this moment where the hobbits actually do get that kind of honor and praise from everybody else, at least, we get that moment so that we have the spirit of that scene in the movie, even though we cut the actual scene as it is in the book for time reasons. The final one from The Return of the King that I will note is that we do get a scene where Frodo is seen touching his shoulder, and then, of course, Sam wonders what's going on, and he says it's, however many years to the day since Weathertop, and that the wound is never fully healed. This is another one of those things where it seems obvious to put in the movie, but also it could have been easily skipped over for time, because it's harder to skip this one for time because it is kind of the basis for him actually having to leave Middle-earth at the end in the first place. Which, even that though, we're kind of lucky, I think, that we got that ending, because think about the fact that they skipped the Scouring of the Shire, and think about some of the other things they did and how modern movies tend to end. Does anybody really want to see Frodo leave Middle-earth because he just can't handle it anymore, basically? No. It's not the ending most people, I think they want going into it. Certainly the first time I read The Lord of the Rings, I was kind of taken aback by the way the story ended. I was like, where's the happy ending? It doesn't seem like a happy ending in a lot of ways. It's bittersweet, of course. But the point here is, in a different setting, in a less favorable studio who was less likely to give Peter Jackson, free rein to adapt the movie as well as he did, you could see them going, we don't want our audiences disappointed by the end of this movie. We're going to have Frodo stay. And so, there's even that element of, we could have gotten something very different, and then that wound that is still bothering him many years later wouldn't have been relevant at all. So it is still kind of surprising in some ways that we get this moment, because it could have been very different. So, I include it for that reason, basically, that it could have been skipped for time. It could have been skipped because they changed the ending to make Frodo's ending a happier ending. A lot of things could have gone wrong with this. So, and again, it's one of those where it's hard to give too much credit, but I do give a little bit. So that is the last entry in the series on details that Peter Jackson got right. Next time we'll be doing subtle changes that only the book fans notice. A couple of the ones in here could have been included in that category, but I had to find enough actual details for this series on, this particular topic. So, you could argue one way or the other, but these are my picks for details that he actually got right in the movies. If you like the video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, share it around. Make sure you subscribe if you want to catch my future content. If you're on YouTube, click the bell icon so you don't miss any notifications. Follow me on the platform formerly known as Twitter to catch Tolkien-related trivia questions every week, and check out the other social and support links in the description below. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially elf friends Nathan Dufour, Robert Kindling, and Stephen Clayton.